I found myself very burnt out sort of last Christmas. It's been a complicated time in the UK government, let's put it that way. And so, it has been very stressful and stuff. And I to the point where we are talking about, really impending deadlines with, political events, end of transition period, all that sort of stuff. And that's a lot of pressure. And, I actually found myself getting to the point where, gained some weight. I was sleeping really badly, actually. I was waking 3, 4 a.m. and not being able to sleep. And so actually there was something really quite disconnected with my own life, and what I wanted to do was actually spend some time, get away from it all, and actually say, what is important for me, what am I doing, and am I enjoying, and I guess the sort of thing I moved to is I want to just do more of the things I enjoy and less of the things I less enjoy.
No rain.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome to a new episode of the Naren Agarwal show. And today I got a buddy of mine who is very, very smart. Let me tell you, when I was in college in the university at Belgium, he's one of the smartest people I met because of the kind of conversations he had, the kind of things he was doing. Really a top-notch, intelligent guy in European politics and the knowledge he holds. But today we're going to be talking about something interesting, something that he holds expertise in. Number one, he is a diversity and inclusion specialist. Also, he's a transformational coach. He works as a senior policy officer in the UK government, yes, the UK government, in the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Welcoming my dear friend and a true intellectual, Mr. Tahmid Chowdhury. Tahmid, how are you doing, brother?
Yeah, not too bad. It's been a while. I don't think anyone's ever introduced me as an intellectual before. I think I usually just use big words and try and pretend to be one.
That's the humble side of you speaking, brother. Tahmid, got a question. Firstly, we were talking about your name. You were talking about how growing up with your name in the UK has been kind of funny because you kind of gave up with the perfect pronunciation. What's that story been? Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. It's and we can talk a bit about sort of diversity and inclusion, but I think it's always good to actually get the personal reflections because I think it's something that's particularly coming up in the sort of Western world, but probably has roots in the fact that there's a lot of second generation people like myself. So I guess in my own story, so my parents from Bangladesh, came to the UK. I was born in the UK, and so it's a funny one always when you're second generation. Kind of understanding your roots and what on the one hand, parents are very keen on sort of the culture that they grew up in. At the same time, I spent most of my life in the UK. But anyway, in terms of the name thing, it's kind of funny. You just kind of give up. Is what I was saying just off air with you. Like on top of that, because my parents actually we kind of have like us as part of more our middle name. But on our sort of birth certificates for myself, my parents and my two brothers, they put Tamidus, and so that's not. It's meant to be Tahmid. And you know what? Just going through school and stuff, you just I've just kind of got used to the very Western sort of Tamid, whereas Tahmid or I just hear it all, and you know what? You just stop caring, and then on top of that, you get Tamidus. My work email address is Tamidus, and I'm just like, whatever. Like it's a good way of knowing.
It doesn't bother you if someone goes off a little bit, right? Because you're kind of used to everybody pronouncing it differently. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think also because I've spent a bit of time. Obviously, we met in Belgium, and I did year abroad in France. And there it's like Tahmid, and it's funny hearing the different inflections. But it's you stop getting hung up about it.
Yeah,
not worth it.
So, Thomas, let me get to this. Diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is becoming a big part of the conversation in the West. So firstly, let me hear from you as somebody who is a second generation immigrant family member in the UK and also who works in diversity and inclusion with the government. What is your take on diversity and inclusion? Why is it important? Is it important? Are we doing enough? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting one. And I actually just wrote I wrote blogs actually, and next week in the UK is National Inclusion Week. I mean, we have dates for everything, but so I actually wrote a blog about sort of diversity and inclusion because I was having a conversation with someone at work. it's a bit of a weird one, to be honest. So hey, I'll start with my perspective. I grew up in the UK, obviously, second generation, all that sort of stuff. At the same time, I went to university in the UK, obviously did my master in Belgium because I had a particular interest, but, went through the system, went through school, obviously, one of the few brown faces at school, but, you get used to that and you don't really think about it at that age. Went to university, then joined the wide scramble, same as everywhere in the world, of, being educated, doing all the things you're meant to, and then finding it really tough to get a job. And you see that particularly in the West, but equally, actually, I think everywhere. I've coached some people that are either Indian or second generation Indian as well, and it's tough out there, especially right now. Anyway, eventually I kind of did some internships. I got the job that I more or less have now. It started my entry level. And I think we grew up with this notion that the world is a meritocratic place where you kind of come in and it doesn't really matter what your background is, but once you're in there, you can kind of shine no matter what it is, and everyone's it's all meritocratic and all that stuff. And actually, a lot what I'm trying to say with the messaging in terms of the blogs I write and some of the coaching side is actually there's a lot of people that out here, I think, that are quite disillusioned really, because they get told grow up in get the top grades, ethnic minority or not ethnic minority, whatever, from Bangladeshi, Indian, Pakistani, whatever background, even Chinese, whatever background, you go through university, and hey, even white people as well, that's British people, go to top of the class, get to the best university, get the best grade in university, and then suddenly you find, hang on, I'm finding it really hard to get a job. And then once you do get a job, you get an internship, and you work really hard to try and prove yourself, and you look to your right and you see some guy or whatever, a woman, whoever, has been in the job 10 years, checks in at 10, checks out at 4, does the bare minimum, doesn't do any of the printing, and you're holding up, you're having to do everything. And you just realize after a while, you think, okay, if I keep working, I can kind of move up, but that's not how the system works. And so I think it's all part of this actual conversation about, and it was really interesting hearing you a bit about what you're doing with your system processes, and actually moving to something a bit more modern. Now, as part of that, I think particularly in a place like the United Kingdom, where immigration has been a facet of it for decades, if not centuries, and increasingly in other parts of Europe, but at the moment, particularly Anglophile countries, so UK, Australia, New Zealand, United States. This is particularly coming up, of doing things like, hey, hang on, what are our organisations looking like? So the UK government, which has been very on the forefront with it actually, and very progressive in that matter, in that manner. How are we reflecting the society that is in our country? So some of the stats I was just looking at today, in the UK, we have 13% are ethnic minorities, so of some sort of different background. There's a lot of black people as well that have come from the Caribbean, particularly because of the roots, but also Africa. And that was the 2011 census, I should say. And the next census is coming in 2021, and the number is going to be a lot higher. And in a place like London, it's over 30%. So there's a high percentage. And hey, when we're looking at other things like LGBT, and there was a YouGov survey, which is one of our sort of polling things, that said, I think it was 18 to 25-year-olds, 1 in 2 did not identify as 100% straight. And so you add that and the fact that I think 18% of the working age population in the UK define themselves as having a disability. I mean, those are some of the stats I was just kind of refreshing myself when I was writing my blog this morning. It's quite handy that I had that off the top of my head. But what we're talking about is an increasingly diverse workforce. And I think in a place like the UK, where it has been a melting pot for quite a while, and what you're seeing is, big organizations, actually the faces and the way it works has stayed the same for a long time. And what you're seeing is entry level people of ethnic minority backgrounds, LGBT, whatever, suddenly finding it quite hard to kind of break through these systems and actually be a part of this. A big part of it was actually a push to get more women in, and I think the UK government has been very good at that actually. But what you found was having to do a lot more initiatives to make it inclusive for returning to work after having a child, and making flexible working more of a part of what we do. And so I guess for me, diversity and inclusion is a very roundabout way to say it, but I think it's looking at how we do things, and in of its nature, what we're talking about, and sometimes it's called equity, diversity, inclusion. So we're talking about diversity in the sense of bringing different people with different backgrounds into the conversation, because hey, this is an increasingly complex world, and if you have people from a very similar background all trying to make decisions, it's going to be a very narrow decision that you make without the thinking before that. The inclusion part has kind of come in after that, because there was a recognition that inclusion, what you often have is these diversity schemes of, let's get some BAME people in. And so you get some interns that sit in the corner writing notes. Now, that doesn't actually achieve things. If anything, it probably makes things worse, because you upset the harmony of quite a homogenous workforce, but are quite happy. Instead, you're bringing in these people that are feeling disgruntled, and therefore that upsets it. But what you do find is, if you get that balance right, and you do bring in these people from diverse backgrounds, and you make them work and be a part of the organization, your sales increase. There's influential reports from McKinsey, which I definitely recommend as parts. So that's it in a nutshell. Very quickly, actually, on equity and equality, I think there has also been a lot in the UK and Western world about, I don't see color and things like this. And actually and it was somewhat of my naive thing of, you come to the workforce and it's a blank slate. It's not like that. We all have our backgrounds. We've all got our strengths from what we grew up with, coming from sort of a South Asian background, grades are very important, all that sort of stuff. That shapes us to who we are, and there's no point in pretending that we're not that. So I think it's just embracing these things, and actually making our workforce a bit more alive. I think in the civil service we talk about bringing our whole selves to work, which some people, maybe it's a bit strong, and maybe it doesn't always work, but it's that sentiment, and just bringing, making people feel able to bring themselves, do the job, bring their own perspectives, because we're hiring people, not robots, and actually accepting, that we're different, and that's a good thing, not sort of something we just squish into a little box to do the job we do. Anyway, I spent a long time answering that.
Yeah, no, but that was awesome. What I really loved about what you said is that it can actually be a point of advantage for businesses to have more diverse people on them, because then that provides for a wider range of viewing at solutions as problems and challenges come in the business. So it's one thing is, yes, we want a more diverse workforce, but at the same time, you can sell that idea to business owners and decision makers, because it actually acts as an advantage to the business as well. So it's really a win-win situation. Here's a question I have for you. What are some examples you would say that the UK government, or where you're working, you said made it easier for women to come into the workforce or work better, and you said the UK government did a good job. What would be some examples that we could learn from?
So I think there are quite a lot of different schemes. So I think purely just in terms of recruitment and how it works. So a sort of return to work scheme. So if you go off on maternity leave, there's a way of staying connected with your organization, and actually you can come back, and actually, that is part of it. And I think the government, the thing is, it's funny, in a place like London, in the UK government, what we actually compete with is, the banks and everything like that, where you can get a very high salary. But where the UK government can do very well is bringing more of that sort of work-life balance, the cliched work-life balance. I'm not a personal fan of calling it that, but, more of a balance, so you're not just always working. And so, having things like flexible working time. So, if you start earlier, you can finish earlier. You can have some breaks to kind of do the school run. I think society, it's changing everywhere, but in the UK as well, I think I would say it's, that you're getting most women these days working. And so being able to do that, having things like childcare vouchers, flexible working, and job sharing, that's another thing. So actually, we have part-time workers. So say you do 2-3 days a week, and shaping the job to fit that, but also having job share workers. So actually, you have two people with 2 to 3 days a week, and they are basically one person doing a job, and it works very well. Actually, you have to organize it, but essentially, you're getting two brains for one. And actually, what we've seen a little bit is actually one or two, men also doing job shares, because it also benefits them to do more on the childcare side, which is what we're seeing more and more as well. So I think those are some of the schemes. We also have internally things like talent development schemes, and there are particularly ones for women. And I think that gives a bit of a space to kind of talk about some of the issues they faced. Less so in government these days, but obviously, 20, 30 years ago, where it was very male dominated, you are talking about some of the things of being the only one in the room, which still can happen, particularly in other industries, and in some of the analytical functions, say perhaps where we're seeing that STEM subjects, there are less women kind of coming through. So doing some schemes to try and increase those rates. There is there's a scheme actually in the UK government, and I think because my general observation and also coaching, it's kind of funny actually. I get a lot of people approaching me who tend to be women more than men actually on coaching, and I think it's that sort of maybe that's a male issue if anything, or the sort of not wanting help sort of thing. Mentoring sounds a lot more like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. But anyway, I think there's a lot for women in terms of imposter syndrome and the feeling of not being good enough, and having to prove your worth. You get that with ethnic minorities as well. For women, I'd say it's a bit different, and obviously there's the societal pressures, and there's always that conflict of even the modern day of, well, okay, but what about the children, sort of thing. And you always have that nagging thing, and I think that's an extra barrier for them to have to contend with. And if you're particularly interested, there's a great book. It's talking about sort of UK and US, but it's called Invisible Women, that I've read, which actually talks a lot about it. So things like actually a lot of our policies are made to benefit men because it's men who are making them, which is kind of going back to the diversity inclusion point. So for example, a car safety seat, European testing, I think I was one that I remembered, before it was just testing on male sort of dummies, which obviously women with a different anatomy, the safety systems did not work, and that's why there was issues, and that's why and that's really problematic. And in a policy space, that is a real issue, because we're talking about half the population, and that's where it's really important. So yeah, those are some examples. I mean, there's plenty more.
Wow.
It's there's a lot there, I think.
Wow. I want to touch upon the topic that you talked about, where ethnic minorities have a tougher time getting jobs. You said that's correct, right? Even if they have the same qualifications. So to be honest, I was under the impression, maybe in the Anglophilic world, if someone's from the South Asian region, they're perceived as smarter, but of course depends on the kind of jobs. So maybe if you would like to share your experience, or some people that from South Asia that had a tougher time in crossing that glass ceiling that exists, and how can we address that? What are some things that the government or the companies can do that you look at in addressing that situation?
Yeah, sure. And it's what's the best place to start, I guess? Because I mean, what I'd firstly say is ethnic minorities is a particular broad church. There's lots different. So actually, what you find is that of the average population from an Indian background, actually I think the average income is slightly higher than the sort of average, whereas Bangladeshi and Pakistani tends to be a lot lower, and then black, I think, can be varying, but a fair bit lower is basically it. And I think a lot of that comes down to the history of the sort of migrants. So I think in general, a lot of the Indian migrants coming to the UK tends to be of a better sort of economic background, socioeconomic background, whereas I think Bangladeshi, I know particularly, but I think to an extent Pakistani as well. You're talking a lot about the sort of migrant workers, and so a lot of, it's funny. There's lots of Indian restaurants, but they're all run by Bengalis in the UK, mainly Siletis as well. So my family ran a Indian restaurant, but it's not Indian. but that's how it is. I think yes, there is a sense that I think the issue is that it's quite easy to get typecast. So, for example, if you come from a Chinese background who also do very well in general in terms of income, you do get typecast as that sort of brainy, mathsy sort of person. And in Indian, similar, you do maths and that's it.
Yeah.
And so in some senses, it's you know, you could say it's not a bad thing, but actually, in reality, when you're trying to move up and stuff, what you tend to be told, what you see is that actually some of the feedback you kind of get is, analytical, and you kind of get a bit typecast, and so that makes it quite hard to move into managerial positions. I think the other thing, and it's another sort of buzzword, but with meaning. There's a thing called unconscious bias, which is this idea that we generally gravitate to people that we are like, and therefore kind of get along with them better. And so and it's unconscious because a lot of the time people don't realize they're doing it. Now there's a sort of argument to be had whether actually sometimes it is, and in what we see is that actually there are higher rates of sort of discrimination, bullying, harassment, and those sorts of things in annual surveys of ethnic minorities, and disability is particularly high if you've got a disability, and of course we are not just one box. You could be ethnic minority, disabled, woman, etc. So what you tend to find, and this happens particularly in the UK with black males, actually, there is this sort of, you get typecast as kind of having an attitude problem, and I've had that. Yeah, I've been told I have an attitude problem, and oh yes, you can come across a bit strong or whatever. And sometimes that's just a difference of culture. I mean, for me,
because you're expected to be submissive in some way. You're expected to be that, and when you're normal and you have your stance, maybe you're tagged as you got an attitude problem because it's a little more than what is expected.
It could be part of that. So sometimes maybe, and I think that's an interesting point. I think there's also a difference in culture in the sort of liberal Western way, of talking about things, and we do this a bit in the civil service and the UK civil service days, and being very overly polite and stuff. That's quite British, and so being like, well, that's a very interesting point, and saying like that, and I do that, but like. So there is a way of speaking and the words that you're meant to use. Now the issue is that who designs those systems? The ones that have already been there. And so this is why we bring in the inclusion on diversity and inclusion, because hang on, yes, there is. If we just go in and say this is the way you're meant to do everything, that's a bit of an issue in of itself. And these are rules made from a decades gone by, and we do need to move into the future. And so sometimes we do need to think about how we are working and what does actually work. Now, that doesn't mean my way is, better than everyone else's, but we do need to have an open conversation. And hey, I grew up in the UK. I have a lot of British mannerisms and stuff. But even then, my perspectives and backgrounds just make me think in a slightly different way. At the same time as well, even if you completely ignore all of that, and I benefit from this in a lot of ways as well. If I went to a UK university, I'd say, I'd have a new chat with my manager and be, oh, well, what university did you go to? Oh, okay, and if I happen to go to that one, I could talk about that and stuff. And so that familiarity really makes a difference. And you think about, and we all do this. There's no point in pretending we're not. We all have our biases, but so if I see someone that I know from a similar background or whatever, or university, or speaks languages I speak, and I'm like, oh well, it'll be nice to speak to them, I'll be naturally gravitating towards them. And so when we're using that in a power hierarchy, where say my manager, not realizing what you can perhaps see is, if you have one manager, I don't know, that's white, and it's managing one white person or one ethnic minority, what can sometimes happen is the natural gravitation towards the white person, and then that ethnic minority not doing his job badly or anything, doing fine, but not necessarily getting the same opportunities. And say, for example, if that ethnic minority was, different religion, say they were Muslim or whatever, and the sort of doesn't really enjoy going to the pub afterwards, for example. But then that's where it kind of happens. Going back to the women example, I think there was an interesting thing about, I think it was in Finland, where they were talking about some of the, and they're very progressive, at least that's what the stats say. And the Scandinavian countries, we often laud them. But she was sort of saying, well, one of the issues is that she was like one of the only woman and I think it was 14 guys, and they were obviously talking about a business thing. And then afterwards, they all went to the sauna because that's what you do in Finland. Obviously, she didn't go, but they basically concluded the discussion on the business in the sauna. And so she was just like, well, how am I meant to say anything? And that's those sort of behaviors that it's tricky.
Wow, that's really interesting. So there's so many challenges with diversity and inclusion, and so many different ways and lenses that you can look at diversity and inclusion from. Like you said, you could be, a certain ethnic background, you could be a certain religious background, you could be a certain gender, you could have a certain sexual orientation, etc., etc. You can be differently abled. But in general, if I would ask you, what are some things that work? What are some things that organizations can do, whether it's training or whether it's instilling certain types of systems in the hiring process? What are some actionables that some people could take in their organizations to make it a more diverse and inclusive place?
Yeah, and obviously, I think this subject still is very relevant in India. I think we just look at it in a different way because what we're talking, and I'm guessing, I'm not an expert, you would know far more than me, but I think what we're talking about there is actually, all the different regions and the different backgrounds, the amazing diversity that there is in, up and down the country, left and right as well. And so I think there's a lot of relevance, but perhaps we wouldn't tag it quite as a sort of diversity inclusion as we'd say in the Western world. So some of the things, so in the UK, we do name blind sifting. So, for example, I heard from someone that said, if I see a name, this is some, friend of a friend sort of, but some guy who owns a small business and says, if I see a name I can't pronounce, I throw that CV in the bin. So it's an issue, and that's 2020 now. So name blind sifting. So we don't see the person. Ideally, we don't know the background of them. I don't think we don't know them. And then we just look at their sort of qualifications and sift on that. A lot of the big firms, so, we're talking about the big consulting firms, and we do this in civil service as well, move away from the quite subjective, interview, do we feel like we like you or not? Because that's very sort of personal opinion, and instead moving to quite, competency based or skills based interviews. So, in the civil service, we talk about, can you demonstrate a skill or a behavior, like being able to see the big picture, or communicating, influencing, and inviting the candidate to use whatever experience that they can. Obviously, that there's still opportunities for bias and stuff, but it is trying to minimize that as much as you can, at least. And this is as good as people have thought of thus far. And also that moves away from the whole thing of, you need to have 20 years experience to get a job, when, I mean, what does years matter, sort of thing. Sometimes, you can sit in a job and do nothing for 10 years, and that doesn't mean you're more qualified to do it. So those are some specific things there. I mean, obviously try and make, so we have like, there are some schemes that exist, such as if you, to increase the rates of people with disabilities to kind of come through into the interview, you can basically tick a box saying, I identify with a disability, and if you pass the benchmark, you will get an interview, even if there are 10 candidates above. It's an imperfect system, and all these things are controversial, and like, well, does that work? Is that tokenism? But it's trying these things. So I think that's the recruitment phase. But as I said, I think a lot of this is about, and in the UK, we are seeing people kind of, at least particularly in a place like London, people are coming with diverse backgrounds. The issue is actually keeping them, and what you see a lot of people leaving because they get disgruntled, and that's where it's really important to have that inclusive culture, and culture is just, I think, so important. So having those, just making sure your workforce is happy, and understanding the differences, and having ways that staff can say, look, this is an issue, and sometimes it's a systemic issue. If you're asking me to clock in at 9 a.m. every morning, do I need to? I think some of this can be quite complicated, but actually for a lot of places, a lot of this is really quite straightforward. Do we always need to have fixed hours? We don't do that anymore so much in the civil service, unless you're literally on customer service. Hence why I can, come chat to you before logging into work. It increases my well-being, increases my sort of motivation to work in where I do, and that costs nothing, and if anything, increases productivity. I remember one consultant, I went on some training, and she was just saying, I went down to a factory and they were all, wearing uniforms. I just said, you don't need to wear uniforms. Morale skyrocketed, production skyrocketed, no cost. It was just an arbitrary thing. So I guess when we're bringing it into diversity and inclusion, I think actually making sure you have an inclusive culture. For us that have moved a few jobs, there are some workplaces that are completely toxic. So having leaders that are open to kind of challenge and asking opinions of people, also having a supportive environment where people are actually how are things at home and stuff. And actually that's something that, and I'm generalizing here and I could be wrong, but it's something we've lost a little bit on the Western world. Whereas I think it is a bit more natural, and the subcontinent of how's your family, how's that stuff. We lose those things, and obviously it's also a bit tougher because we have more people from different backgrounds as well in general in different countries, and so it's a bit more uncomfortable. But breaking through that, and one of the things we try to do is making it more comfortable to have this conversation about people's backgrounds and race, because it's very British and liberal sort of white thing to do, of like, oh, I don't want to kind of ask you, and some people go too far and then just say like, where are you from, and it's obviously seen as a that's not a great way of doing it. But there are these barriers, and you kind of have to jump through them, and when you are comfortable, it's just so noticeable. It's the thing with culture, you can't write it down, but if you have a culture where people are open and I am feeling a bit down today, mental health's a big thing. I am taking a sick day for mental health because I'm just, that's how I feel, and I need it. And having leaders to be open and honest about that. We talk a lot about sort of authenticity at high levels. I mean, I could go on, but I think it's those sorts of things in a nutshell.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. I really love the blind hiring policy, or like the name blind hiring policy. That's pretty cool and unique. Tahmid, I want to get into the transformational coaching aspect of what you do. So tell me about what do you mean by transformational coach, and who do you coach, and why do you think there is a need for a transformational coach?
So I think I'll talk a bit about my own story with it. So obviously, I've started doing this coaching and kind of writing outside of my work. It kind of gives me a fulfillment that, and perhaps the same way that you kind of do these things. It's something different. I found myself very burnt out sort of last Christmas. It's been a complicated time in the UK government, let's put it that way. And so, it has been very stressful and stuff. And I, to the point where we are talking about really impending deadlines with political events, end of transition period, all that sort of stuff, and that's a lot of pressure. And I actually found myself getting to the point where gained some weight. I was sleeping really badly. Actually, I was waking 3-4 a.m. and not being able to sleep. And so actually there was something really quite disconnected with my own life, and what I wanted to do was actually spend some time, get away from it all, and actually say, what is important for me, what am I doing, and am I enjoying, and I guess the sort of thing I moved to is I want to just do more of the things I enjoy and less of the things I less enjoy, as a simple life maxim. And since then I kind of I trained to become a transformational coach over this year. Kind of took my yoga more seriously and kind of my eating more centered. You're talking about sort of weight loss as well beforehand. So I've lost about 15 kg since the beginning of the year. And a lot of that is just shifting up my priorities. I understanding myself as someone that's very values driven. I'm wanting to kind of impart good in the world and helping, and that's kind of what brought me to the civil service as a public work. But understanding that obviously there's only so much you can do in some systems, and so kind of taking that, and for me at the beginning it was just kind of learning a skill and being a better manager. But then I think as I kind of developed into it, I can see there's a lot of people like me that are, and that's what I was talking about earlier of, you graduate from university, you work really hard, and I think there's a real narrative that the young people of today, and obviously this is millennials, not even talking about Gen Z. You're going to make a change in the world. You're going to do all this. All these promises, and you go through the system, and you kind of hear this, and you're like, okay, well, great. And I've worked really hard. I've got these grades, and then suddenly you graduate, and you realize nobody cares about grades. Particularly not in the UK and sort of in countries where some of the top graduate schemes that we have aren't even looking at university grades anymore, or even asking for them, because they realize that it's just a barrier to different social mobility and diversity inclusion. So and I think that's a positive step, but what it leaves is a lot of people kind of scrambling around, and there's a lot of low paid internships and things like that, and people just trying to do something that they find fulfilling. At the same time, it's really tough to get into that field, and when they get in, they just get very disillusioned, because the dream that we get told of the workplace, and you can do all these things and all that, and the change you can make. And hey, it's not about people not being patient. It's realizing that the system these days, the idea of slowly working up an organization are gone. You're just going to sit there as an intern unless you leave, and then you leave to a slightly better paid job. And you have the same issues, or similar issues, I should say, but different things that you didn't realize would be an issue in this new job. And so you're just in this merry-go-round. And I think the sort of thing I find is something that I'd like to do more. And actually, if I can, honestly speaking, if I can make this go work, I'd love to do it as a full-time thing of the coaching, and actually, letting people, and it comes back to that leadership point of authenticity. Actually, what do people want to do? What do you as an individual want to do? And supporting you to actually do it. With the amount of pressures and the amount of negativity with online social media, applying for jobs, 500 rejections because it's mad at you trying to get a job. It's so much negativity, and it's really hard to take. At the same time, you've got these voices and almost an embarrassment that you've got family and stuff saying you're going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and you're going to change the world, you're going to be president, whatever, and you can't even get a job. It's a nightmare. It's horrible, and this is why we have so much issues with mental health coming up. And so I think you get so stuck in that between phase of I've got this job that's a bit meh, but actually trying to help, but it's not what you want to do, because you're not making the change that you want to. And so what I coach is trying to support people to do what they actually want to do. And I think what can be really valuable is, let's pause all the realities around us and actually take a moment to say, who are you? Who am I? What do I care about? And what do I want to try and do? And it doesn't have to be set in stone. And it's not like it can't change in 5-10 years, whatever. Once you know that, actually, what are you going to do to actually get there? And using that as the motivation to say, look, I'm going to grind down for a while. I'm going to have to do things outside of work or whatever. And but with the aim of, look, this is what I really want to do. And by doing that, kind of moving away from this thing that it has to be our destiny to have mediocre, unfulfilled lives, because that's the way the world works, to let's try and do something. Some of us are fortunate to enjoy our jobs, but a lot of us aren't. And there is a big wide world out there, and at least if we can know the options, yes, we can give it a try. Sometimes it doesn't work, but often it doesn't work, and then you find something else that does. But a lot of people are kind of not necessarily aware of the things that you can do. And so me as a coach, kind of working with individuals, and it's funny, actually, a lot of the other thing, I guess, that attracted me to it is that, you could say, you described me as an intellectual and, doing all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter what I think a lot of the time. It matters what you as a listener, you, Naren, or whoever, what you want. And so me as a mentor, where, I'm telling you, this is what you should do, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter what I think. It matters what you think. And coaching is about exploring what you as an individual want and think and believe. And if you believe something, so for me, I believe that I can do something. I believe I can make this coaching work. I'm going to put the effort in. The things that are a bit boring, I'm going to have the motivation to do. Now, if someone told me, you should be a coach, like everyone, nobody likes being told what to do. Everyone hates it. That's not going to help anyone. So actually understanding the importance and power of coaching conversations and allowing people to kind of come to their own conclusions and figure out what they want to do, because their life is completely different to mine, and I can't pretend to know it.
That is awesome. That's powerful. And what's really beautiful is that you applied it in your life and did it. And you took that moment of self-reflection and you worked upon yourself. So it's a journey that you've had, and now you're wanting to help others. I think I suddenly struck a chord with you when you talked about how the young people are being told that, they can make a change and they can make a difference, and a lot of them are doing well. But a large part of the population also finds it really difficult to find a job that they truly care about, or gets into a job and then gets into the hamster wheel of not enjoying it. It's funny. Like, I have friends in Brazil, I have a friend in Mexico, I have friends over here in India. It was my experience in the U.S. right after I got out of the college. It's very unique that that similar patterns I can also see around the world happening to young professionals and adults, like you
Yeah.
said. And I think one of the most powerful things is exactly what you said. We can do take a moment for ourselves, maybe find somebody who can coach us and assist us, or get away to figure out what's that inside thing that we want to do and what pulls us. Because once you get the compass, then you get the map. It's easy. But if you have a map without a compass, wow, what will you do? Because you don't know where to go. So
Yeah.
that is awesome. That is awesome. Thomas, any final things that you would like to say before we end, or any questions you have for me?
So I guess just one thing that kind of came to me on that point actually. So one, I guess the other thing about the sort of coaching. So hey, you can look at my LinkedIn and it sounds all grand, and hey, I managed to make it, so to speak, got a crew, got a job that is permanent, and it does treat me well and stuff, and I got promoted after a couple of years. Um, I guess the other thing I kind of have found is that am I 100% fulfilled? That there's pros and cons. There's pros and cons with any job, and so actually I think as human beings, we all sort of see that distance and we say, look, that's the next thing. And then once we're there, we'll be happy. Whereas, the cliche, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, it's sort of enjoying what we're doing now. And actually, you'll be far more successful, ironically, by putting less worry into how you're doing and just enjoying things more now. And I guess the other message with the coaching is that actually, and you see it all around, the people within my organization are then looking up, and you're always looking for the next thing. And actually you could look at me as like how far I've come and all that stuff and expect me to be really content and happy and everything's great, whereas actually there's a lot of things that aren't. This sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it doesn't really work like that. And I guess that's something I kind of wanted to kind of
Mm,
highlight, because hey, you could look at me and say I've done great and blah blah blah, but actually that's not how life works. And actually I think there's just a lot more things we can do out there. So yeah, it's a funny old one. But I think it's figuring out what we want to do in life, which is the eternal question. But quite a lot of us kind of give up on asking ourselves that question, and I think that's where coaching can be really valuable. So yeah, those were my reflections. Be interested to hear your thoughts. How has it been for you? And
Brother, it's really interesting because I feel um, every time we're at a certain stage in life, especially in school, there is a next level that's defined for us. So it's much easier. Okay, after grade 9, I got to go to grade 10. After grade 10, I got to go to 11, and then after school, I got to go to college. And maybe if you want to do a master's, society kind of predefines it for you, so it's easy. But once you get out there, there is nobody for you, nobody defining for you, because there's so many options. And sometimes we let others define what we want to do after college or in our career. And that's where we mess up. Exactly what you said. So I think it's after you get into the workforce, it's not about someone else building that cocoon for you and you becoming a butterfly out of that. It's really about you yourself building a cocoon for yourself to figure out the color of butterfly that you want to be, rather than others make the cocoon for you and predefine the kind of color you want to come out as a butterfly. You see what I mean? So
mm,
I think it's that process of conscious cocoon building for yourself, so you can go into that growth phase and come out in the color that you want, which is very important. And that is where self-awareness, self-actualization, self-knowledge becomes key. So one of my key factors is meditation. That is something that has helped me a lot. That is something that I practice every day, and not just every day, but like once I go on days of silence where I'm journaling or just self-reflecting, because it's something I think human beings are designed to do. And in the 21st century, in the era of over communication, sometimes when you just cut everything out, a lot of clarity rises forth. So that can be meditation, that can be silent states. And those are the times I think we can reflect upon what you said, building the cocoon for ourselves so that we know where to head next.
Mm, yeah. And it's funny. There's a new craze of like meditation and mindfulness in the West for that exact reason because we just don't do it.
Exactly, and I think people are now realizing the value and the science behind it. Um, of um, yeah, just letting things be sometimes, because sometimes the most wonderful things happen when you just let it be. You just got to put a flower seed and let it be. Just add some nutrition, it'll grow. You don't have to go and pull the flower out. Same thing, like sometimes to have more clarity within, you just got to let yourself be, and clarity just rises forth rather than
Yeah.
us try and pull it out.
I wrote a blog the other day.
Yes,
On the spot, I was going for a brunch and I just saw a bird just sitting in a nest.
yes,
And it's just a bird sitting on a nest, and it's probably sitting on an egg. I was just sitting there, and especially in this conversation of checking phones. I've got a laptop here, I've got a phone here, and all this stuff. It was just sitting there, and it sat there. I had my meal, all this stuff, waited for my meal. It's just sitting there, completely just still. And it was just amazing. Like, we can't manage to do that. It didn't need to check its phone. It didn't need to, you know, play with its little nest. It was just sitting on, presumably on its egg, doing what it needed to, and it was just completely
yes.
still. It's amazing.
That is beautiful, man. What a great sharing. Tahmid, once again, thank you so much for coming and really touching on a couple very interesting aspects on the show, diversity and inclusion. And then we hit a whole different tangent, and that was awesome. Transformational
Yeah,
coaching. It's so valuable for the young adults and working professionals out there to hear this part of the conversation. I think you added so much value. Thank you so
yeah.
much, Tahmid.
And if I could quickly just mention before the end, so I do I write a couple of times a week, and so I can either catch me on LinkedIn or my website, which if I could pass to you, I'd love to. I mean,
we
if
will
people
we
find it
will we will
valuable,
get
read
your,
it.
yeah, 100%. We'll
Um,
get your website posted on the copy, guys. Check out Tamid's website and blog posts. If you found this podcast interesting and want to stay in touch and connected to what he is offering in terms of his valuable pieces of advice out there.